Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. This is Believe for Bigger, and you're in for a real treat today because I have a very special guest. She's actually a relationship coach. Her name is April, and I am going to have her introduce herself. We were chatting just before I hit the record button, and I'm already excited. I actually met April through a Christian podcast group that I'm a part of on Facebook. I came across her post and I thought, you know what? This is someone that my audience will definitely relate to because as I looked at her profile and also went to do some research on April, I found some really key words that really just aligned with who I am. So she's about laughter, she's about joy, she's about recovery, she's about moving people forward. And those were all key things that I was like, okay, there's something about her. And then she's going to share a Bible scripture with you that I feel like it's just like right on point to who she is and what God has called her to do. So, April, why don't you tell the audience a little bit more about who you are and what you do?
Thank you for having me, Christina. It's an honor to be here. Like you said, my name is April, and I do two things. So, I'm a divorce recovery and relationship coach. And many of you guys may be wondering, what in the world is that? So, my passion is it's helping primarily women, but people helping women to recover from the trauma of heartbreak and prepare for healthy love. So, that's really what I do in a nutshell.
I love that. And tell us where God led you to that Bible scripture that we were talking about prior to hitting the record button.
Absolutely. So I started doing this work about 5 years ago. I've been coaching for 11 years.
Okay.
And 7 or 8 years into that coaching journey, I went through my third divorce. And I felt like after my healing journey, God was saying, you need to help people like you. And so I thought, okay, well, that's great. I've been coaching all this time. I love coaching and I got a few coaching certifications, but I wasn't quite sure where I belonged, if that makes sense, right? And so I started praying about God, what is this? Like, what am I really supposed to be doing? And he took me to Isaiah 61:1. And it says that I have anointed you to preach the gospel, to heal the brokenhearted, and to set the captives free. And I went, oh my Lord, that is exactly what I'm passionate about. That is exactly the work that I'm doing is to help those people to heal from a broken heart and to set them free from what's been holding them back. And so talk about seeing yourself in the Bible, right? Like that was so eye-opening that I was like, okay, God, this is what I'm supposed to be doing.
I love that. Because we are supposed to preach the gospel, right? We are supposed to share who Jesus is and what he has done in our life, and the fact that it just aligns with everything that you have gone through. So, April, I don't know if you've heard this, but this is a quote by Ed Milet. And he says, and I'm not going to quote it, exactly how he says it because I can't remember word for word, but he does say that you are the most qualified to help the person you used to be. So, what I hear from
Absolutely.
you is this is something that you have personally walked through. So, tell us a little bit more about your personal journey of how God led you not only to this Bible verse, but said, these are the people that you are supposed to be coaching and helping to just like fully recover, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So my journey started at this point about 25 years ago. I was 21 years old and I had gone through my first divorce.
Okay.
And that one was one of those things where we had ended as friends. And I thought, okay, I'll get married again someday. And then at 31, I found myself going through my second divorce. And I thought, okay, I'm done with men. I'm done with dating. This isn't for me. But because of patterns and behaviors and cycles and all these things that we go through, at 41, I woke up to my third husband leaving.
Mm.
And in that moment, I said, okay, something is going on. Like something is happening and I need to figure it out. And I remember going to my parents' house and like crying on their couch. And my dad was like, you've got to figure this out. Like, you've got to figure out why this keeps happening and happening every 10 years. And so I started on a year-long healing journey that started with a lot of ice cream and a lot of anger at God, because I was like, dude, why didn't you stop this? Like, why didn't you stop this from happening? I did all the things that people told us to do. We went to premarital counseling, like we did all the things. And so I started out really angry with God. So I don't know if you guys listening have ever been there, but God can handle your anger. It's okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so over the course of that year, I went to therapy and I had a life coach, and I just had all these different resources so that I could actually heal from what was the trauma that was causing me to enter into these same relationships. And so at the end of that year, I heard God say, I want you to tell your story. Now, what's funny is I was in marketing at the time and I wrote a lot of marketing content, but I didn't like to write per se. But along this journey, my therapist said, I want you to start journaling. And I was like, oh, why? I don't want to do this. But I would journal. I would just journal my feelings and, the things that I was going through. So at the end of that year, when God said, I want you to tell your story, those journals became a book. So I published the book. And when I hit publish, I remember hearing God say, this is not the end. It's just the beginning. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, I wrote the book. I told my story. I am this person in leadership on staff at a church. I'm the one who is praying, for you in the prayer line. And now I just told the whole world that I've been divorced 3 times. Like, what more do you want? Over those 20 years, I didn't know who to turn to say, how do you recover from a divorce? What does healthy love look like? What should I be doing when I'm dating? No, there was no one there that looked like me, that sounded like me, that I could go to for a resource. And so essentially I became the help that I didn't have over those 20 years.
So tell me how you actually turn to a life coach. Like, where was that introduced and where did you feel like, okay, maybe this is something that I need to explore a little bit more?
So for me, during that first year, there was a friend of mine who was actually a life coach. Now, I had been going to a therapist, and for those of you who don't really know the difference, I like to put it this way: if you have a challenge in your life, imagine it being a tree, right? That challenge is a tree, and therapists are really trained to help you uproot the tree. So they're, digging deep, digging into your past. How do we get that tree out of your way? And then life coach like myself, we help you to determine what do you need to plant there? How do you help it to grow? So we're forward thinking. So I had met with a friend of mine who was a life coach, and she was the first person that started asking me questions about the future. Like, what do you want in the future? And I was like, I don't know. Is when I thought to myself, man, I really want to help of life coaching, because I had been a business coach for a long time. But that's what started my journey of becoming a life coach, is because working with her and going, wow, I really love that there's someone to tell me, to help me think about the future. So, yeah.
I really love your definition of therapy and life coaching, because I'm on the same page as well too. Because what ends up happening is a lot of times these words are thrown around and we don't really know the difference. And when people come to me personally for life coaching, yeah, I might touch on a little bit of the past just so I can get a better understanding of where you are today. But just like you said, I am forward thinking. So as a life coach, and you and I are both life coaches, we push people forward, right? But I think part of your journey, April, is you really had to fully understand how you got to where you were in a third divorce, right? I'm certain that that's not something that you planned in your life, right? You wouldn't have wanted this for yourself. And so going back and actually just figuring out like you said, some of those patterns that just kind of led you to this. What would you say is the biggest thing that you have learned throughout your journey?
It was funny. My first therapy session, when I went to therapy for real this time, my first therapy session, the first question she asked was, she said, "Well, tell me about your childhood." And I said, "Well, this has nothing to do with my childhood. I need to figure out why I keep getting divorced." And she's like, "Yeah, I know. Tell me about your childhood."
Okay.
And so, one of the biggest things that I learned that helped to give me grace in this season, because when you go through a divorce, when you go through a heartbreak, a lot of times we definitely turn in on ourselves, right? And so, what that did for me was it helped me to understand why I had made some of the decisions I made. Now, let me be clear, we do need some ownership, right? We do need to
Good.
own our decisions and our actions, but it made it make sense. Oh, okay. I had an issue with rejection. This is why I was picking this type of man. Or I felt unloved. So this is why I was making this decision. So it was that aha moment
Mhm.
for me to just kind of get started with, like, how did I get here? And I say it like this, when we're walking through life, let's say you're walking to the mailbox every day and there is a place that you trip every time. Like there's a place on the ground that you trip. At some point, we've got to look down and go, what do I keep tripping over? And so that is what like that initial season feels like. It's just trying to figure out, what is it that keeps tripping me up? What is it that keeps holding me back? So for me, I found peace and gave myself grace, because it was like, okay, I better understand. I'm not this terrible person. I'm not this terrible mom, right? I wasn't this terrible wife. I just had some trauma that wasn't healed, which was causing me to make these decisions in my life.
I love the way you put that because that's what happens a lot of times with us when we have past trauma, past things that we have gone through because everybody has gone through something, right? And a lot of times we do put that inwardly. We try to, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of guilt that we kind of tend to carry, right? And if we don't actually uproot it, just like you said, when we go through therapy, and we know now, April, that now it is becoming more common and more acceptable in our society to actually go through therapy, right? To figure out what it is that, like you said, is tripping us up, right? Whereas maybe years ago, that just wasn't something that, people spoke about. So let's shift a little bit to talk about how you get or help women or even just people in general. How do you get them to just rewrite the story? So they've gone through the trauma, they've gone through relationship breakups, they've gone through things in their life. Now, how do they go forward? What are some of the things that you coach your clients to help them to go forward?
Yeah, restarting your story is something that I got a few years ago, because I would have people who would say, I wish I could redo the past, right? I wish I could rewrite history. Well, we can't do that. That's just impossible. But what we can do is we can restart our story. And what God reminded me of, so I'm a reader, love to read. When I was younger, I would read these choose your own adventure books. And so in the book, the main character would be, walking through life and they'd come to an impasse. So do I go over the bridge or do I go in the woods? And you, as the reader, was able to choose like their next step, right? So you would say, go over the bridge, you turn to page 87, and the story kept going. And what God showed me is, through his grace, through his mercy, through his love, we have the ability to choose our own adventure, in essence, restarting that story. So maybe we did take a wrong path here, but we have the ability to choose differently to restart the story. And so that became a really like meaningful talk for me that I started to share with people. But one of the very, very, very first ways that we can start to restart that story is our thinking.
Mm.
With my clients, I'll ask them, what do you believe about yourself? What do you believe about your past? Right? So that's where we start. I believe that where our mind goes, our life will go. right?
Yes.
So as a man thinketh, so is he.
Mhm.
And I'm reminded of the story of the children of Israel when they were scouting out the promised land. And when they came back, they were like, God, it's, Moses, it's everything that you said it was going to be, but we are like grasshoppers in their sight. Well, who told you that?
Right.
Right? Who told you that you were like grasshoppers when God had already said this land was yours? And so
Mhm.
that's the first thing we start with is what is our mindset about ourselves, about God, about our past, and about our future?
I love that because that's actually how I coach clients as well too. Everything starts with a thought and everything is in our mindset and how we actually look at things. And I love the questions that you ask of like, what is it that you believe, not only for about your past, but what do you believe for your future? So if you have those negative thoughts and those negative, just anything negative about your past, it's really going to limit you on how you're actually going to be able to move forward. So that's really, really powerful. So, April, I have really enjoyed talking to you. Is there anything, last words that you want to share with the audience? Any freebies, anything that you feel like people could really relate to right now in this season of life?
Absolutely. So if you're listening to this and you're in that space that I talked about, in that when I was in that 20 years of unhealed space, just trying to figure out life and, maybe my self-esteem was low. So if you're listening, the first thing that I'll tell you is that God has not given up on you,
Mm,
that you were made for love. And we talk about being made for love a lot of times in romantic relationships, but you were made for love through loving yourself first. And so just remember that God has not forgotten about you and that you have the ability to restart your story. So if someone wants to connect with me, I've got ebooks, I've got free resources. I just launched a new podcast called When Love Comes. And the premise of that is just sharing those stories of heartbreak and healing and then finding true love. So you can find all of that at aprilnowlin.com or April Nowlin on most social media platforms. And I would love to connect with you guys.
awesome. So if this podcast blessed you, and if you're actually watching us on YouTube, I am going to put all of her information on in the show notes and reach out to April and let her know that something that she said really blessed you. And then also, if you feel like you need a life coach like her, reach out to her. She is more than happy to coach you. I know that there are so many people that are really going to relate to everything that we talked about. And again, April, I just say thank you so much for the work that you're doing. I love Isaiah 61 and 1, and I'm going to read it. It says, "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me because the Lord has appointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor." This is exactly the work that April is doing. She is living out her calling for what God has called her to do in this life. My friends, if this blessed you, I want you to share it with a friend. And I want you to go and reach out to April and let her know how much you appreciate her being on the podcast. My friends, until next time, God is good and you are so blessed.